They say accounting ledgers are nothing but dry numbers. But what happens when those numbers become weapons for revenge? When you're erased from the company you built from scratch, thrown out like worthless trash? Do you choose silence, or do you transform that silence into a fatal strike? This is the story of how one woman quietly turned a balance sheet into the blade that brought down the man who destroyed her. In the world of corporate warfare, sometimes the deadliest attacks come not from boardroom shouting matches, but from the silent click of a calculator in the hands of someone with nothing left to lose. My name is Laura Mitchell, and at 9:37 a.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other, my decade-long career at Westridge Capital ended with the theatrical cruelty only corporate America can perfect. The Zoom call had started at 9:30 sharp, all-hands meeting, mandatory attendance. I'd logged in from my home office, coffee still steaming beside my keyboard, quarterly reports spread across my second monitor. The familiar grid of faces filled my screen accounting team, analysts, the junior associates who still called me Ms. Mitchell even after I'd told them Laura was fine. Then Mark Reynolds appeared, our COO. His camera positioned at that power angle he'd learned from some executive coaching seminar. His office backdrop was pristine, those leather-bound books he'd never read arranged just so. He started with the usual corporate platitudes about challenging market conditions and strategic realignments. I was half listening, reviewing next quarter's projections, when I heard my name. "Which brings me to some difficult but necessary decisions," Mark said, his voice carrying that false gravity executives adopt when they're about to destroy someone. Effective immediately, Laura Mitchell's position as Chief Accounting Officer is being eliminated. The coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. My face was still on screen, pinned in that brutal Hollywood Squares grid for all 93 employees to witness. I watched myself in that small rectangle, the slight widening of my eyes the only betrayal of the earthquake happening inside me. The Slack sidebar exploded, private messages firing like bullets. The public channels went silent, that specific kind of corporate silence that screams louder than any words. I saw the emoji reactions popping up on Mark's video tile, shocked faces, confused faces, one brave soul adding an angry face before quickly deleting it. Laura's contributions over the years have been noted, Mark continued, and that pause before noted was a masterpiece of corporate character assassination. However, moving forward, we need fresh perspectives in our financial leadership. Her responsibilities will be absorbed by the consulting team from Brennan Advisory. Brennan Advisory, the firm run by Mark's golf buddy, the same consultants who'd been sniffing around our books for months, asking questions about systems I'd built from scratch, processes I'd refined through countless 70-hour weeks. Someone forgot to mute. I heard a whispered "holy shit" before the line went dead again. My camera was still on, 93 pairs of eyes waiting to see if I'd cry, rage, beg. Would Laura Mitchell, the woman who'd caught a 7-figure accounting error that saved the company from SEC investigation, who'd built their entire risk management framework, who'd been there since Westridge was just 5 guys and a dream in a WeWork space, would she finally lose that legendary composure? I did something worse than crying or screaming. I did nothing. I sat there, back straight, face neutral, as Mark continued his performance. He talked about transition timelines, about knowledge transfer, about the generous severance package that came with standard terms and conditions, corporate speak for the kind of non-compete agreement that would exile me from the only industry I'd ever known. The meeting chat was a graveyard. Even the kiss-asses who usually flooded it with applause emojis stayed silent. I saw my team members' faces. Rachel, who I'd mentored from junior accountant to senior analyst, had tears running down her cheeks. David, my deputy, looked like he might punch through his monitor. "Laura," Mark said, addressing me directly for the first time, "we'll need you to transition your files and access by end of day. HR will send the necessary documentation." This was the moment for my response, the moment where I could defend myself, remind them of everything I'd done, every crisis I'd navigated, every late night I'd spent ensuring their numbers were bulletproof, the moment where I could expose Mark for the incompetent political player he was, surviving on golf course relationships and recycled McKinsey presentations. Instead, I reached for my mouse, moved it to the leave button, and clicked. But not before I made sure everyone saw me smile. It wasn't a defeated smile or a brave face. It was the kind of smile that made Mark's expression flicker. Just for a second. The kind of smile that said, I knew something he didn't. My screen went black. 10 years at Westridge Capital ended with a click. I sat in my home office, surrounded by the evidence of my dedication framed awards, team photos from better days, the lucite tombstones from deals that had built Mark's reputation on my analytical framework. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Text messages, WhatsApp notifications, LinkedIn alerts. I didn't look at any of them. I was too busy staring at the leather journal on my desk, the one where I'd been documenting every irregular transaction, every questionable decision, every moment Mark had overruled my risk assessments. They thought they were erasing me. They had no idea they'd just set me free. The termination agreement arrived at 3:45 p.m. that same day, delivered by courier like a death certificate requiring my signature. 60 pages of legal brutality designed to bury me professionally. The non-compete clause was a masterwork of corporate vindictiveness, 18 months prohibition from working in financial services, consulting, or any adjacent industries which, given my specialization, meant everything short of teaching yoga. The severance was insulting. 3 months' pay for 10 years of building their financial infrastructure. The NDA was even worse, forbidding me from discussing any aspect of company operations, past, present, or future. They wanted to buy my silence cheap and ensure I'd never work in finance again. But the real cruelty was in the details. Page 37. Subsection 12. Immediate revocation of all company accesses, removal from all historical documentation, and this was Mark's personal touch. Revision of company materials to reflect current organizational structure. They weren't just firing me, they were erasing me from history. By 5 p.m., the erasure had begun. Rachel texted me screenshots. My name had vanished from every project brief, every quarterly report, every presentation I'd authored. The risk management framework I'd developed was now attributed to Westridge Financial Team, the forensic audit that had saved us from disaster in 2021, led by senior management. The company wiki had been sanitized. My bio page redirected to a 404 error. The email announcing my departure, sent by Mark at 4:58 p.m., was a monument to passive aggression. Laura Mitchell has decided to pursue other opportunities. We wish her well in her future endeavors. Decided, as if I'd chosen this. Then came the real poison. Mark held a department meeting the next morning. I heard about it from David, who called me against company orders. Mark had actually said, with that practiced sincerity of his, that the company's financial stability had never depended on any single individual, and that bringing in Brennan Advisory would elevate us beyond the limitations of legacy thinking. Legacy thinking, that's what 10 years of 18-hour days had become. I didn't respond to any of it. Not the texts from colleagues, not the LinkedIn messages asking if I was okay, not even the veiled threat from HR about ensuring smooth transition of proprietary information. I deleted my LinkedIn profile entirely, deactivated Twitter, went dark on every platform where my professional existence had lived. The silence unnerved them. David told me later that Mark had asked 3 times whether I'd signed the separation agreement, whether I'd made any concerning statements to former colleagues, whether anyone had heard from me. Let them wonder. I spent those first weeks in my apartment, surrounded by bankers' boxes of personal items hastily packed from my office by security. They'd been thorough, even removed my Cornell diploma from the wall. Packed it in bubble wrap like evidence of a crime. But they'd missed things. The personal notebook where I drafted process improvements during lunch breaks, the USB drive I'd labeled tax returns that contained my original framework designs, date stamped 2 years before I joined Westridge, the email threads I'd forwarded to my personal account back when such things weren't monitored, documenting every time Mark had overruled my risk assessments. My severance checks arrived like clockwork, direct deposited every 2 weeks. Each one felt like hush money. I let them accumulate, untouched. I was living on savings, eating takeout in my pajamas, letting the world think Laura Mitchell had been successfully disappeared. My mother called daily, her voice tight with worry. "You should sue them," she said. "This is wrongful termination." "It's not," I told her. They were very careful. Then what are you going to do? I looked at the leather journal on my coffee table, now thick with notes, diagrams, and timelines. Nothing, I said. Absolutely nothing. She didn't understand. How could she? She didn't know that silence could be a weapon, that disappearing completely was sometimes the best way to reappear, exactly where they'd never expect you. Former colleagues tried to reach out through mutual friends. Would I be a reference? Did I know anyone hiring? Was I okay? I responded to none of them. Let them think I was broken, devastated, gone. Let Mark report to the board that the Mitchell situation had been handled cleanly. Meanwhile, I studied that non-compete agreement like it was sacred text. Every clause, every provision, every carefully crafted restriction, and buried in the state law references, I found what I was looking for: Senate Bill 421, passed but not yet enacted. In 4 months, it would invalidate every non-compete agreement in the state retroactively. Mark, for all his golf course wisdom, had missed it. Brennan Advisory, for all their consulting expertise, had missed it. The expensive lawyers who drafted my corporate execution had missed it. But I hadn't. Because that's the thing about being genuinely good at your job. Instead of just good at playing the game, you actually read the fine print. I closed the journal and walked to my window, looking out at the city's financial district where Westridge's offices towered. Somewhere up there, Mark was probably in another meeting, taking credit for another quarter of stability built on systems I'd designed. Make them owe, I whispered to my reflection in the window. Not destroy them, not humiliate them. Make them owe, make them pay, literally and perpetually, for what they'd built on my foundation. The silence of my apartment felt like the quiet before a storm. They thought they'd buried Laura Mitchell. They had no idea what they'd actually planted. The plan crystallized at 2:15 a.m. on a sleepless Thursday, 3 weeks after my corporate execution. I was sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by papers, printouts of old emails, system architecture diagrams I'd sketched on napkins during late-night debugging sessions, screenshots of Slack conversations where I'd proposed innovations that were dismissed as unnecessarily complex until they became essential. Every piece told the same story. I hadn't just been an employee at Westridge. I'd been its architect. The USB drive sat in my palm, innocuous as a stick of gum. Inside were the original frameworks I developed during my Columbia MBA, 2 full years before Westridge existed. The risk assessment algorithms, the automated reconciliation protocols, the predictive cash flow models, all created for my thesis. Integrated financial risk management in mid-market firms, time-stamped, submitted to the university database, published in abbreviated form in the Journal of Financial Analytics. Mark had no idea this existed. Why would he? He'd never asked about my background beyond confirming I had the right credentials. He'd certainly never read my academic work. To him, I was just the quiet woman who made the numbers work, who stayed late to fix other people's mistakes, who never pushed for credit as long as the job got done. I opened my laptop and created a new folder, Phoenix. Inside, I began organizing everything, not just the technical documentation, but the evidence trail. Email threads where Mark had claimed my proposals as his own. Meeting minutes showing I'd presented solutions months before Brennan Advisory discovered the same approaches. The Git repository logs from our internal systems, showing my username on 90% of the critical financial modules. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed leverage, and leverage required infrastructure. I pulled out the business card that had been sitting in my desk drawer for 6 months. Thomas Hernandez, the lawyer who'd approached me at a conference about protecting intellectual property in financial services. Back then, I'd politely declined. I was a company woman, loyal to a fault. Now, I dialed his number despite the late hour. "Ms. Mitchell," he answered on the second ring, sounding fully awake. "I heard about Westridge. Shameful." "You said something once about prior art in financial systems," I said, skipping pleasantries. "About how frameworks developed before employment could remain personal IP." "I did. I also said most people never properly document their prior work." I looked at my thesis, at the USB drive, at the pile of evidence. I'm not most people. We met the next morning in his office, a modest space compared to Westridge's marble and glass palace. Thomas reviewed my documentation with the intensity of a surgeon, occasionally making notes, sometimes asking for clarification. After 3 hours, he leaned back. "This non-compete is aggressive," he said. "But you're right about SB 421. Come January, it's toilet paper. The IP claim. However, that's immediate. These frameworks are unquestionably yours. The timestamps are clear. The academic publication establishes prior art, and these emails show they knew it was your work." "I don't want to destroy them," I said. "Not yet." He raised an eyebrow. "I want to build something better. Then I want them to pay for using my work without permission." Thomas smiled. "Retroactive licensing fees can be substantial, especially if they've been generating revenue from your IP. Every trade they've risk assessed, every position they've reconciled, every forecast they've generated for the past 10 years has run through my frameworks. That's potentially millions in licensing." "It's not about the money." "No," he agreed. "It's about making them acknowledge what they stole." I left his office with a plan, not the emotional, scorched earth revenge fantasy I'd entertained in my darkest moments, but something far more elegant. I would rebuild everything I'd created, but better, cleaner, without the compromises and patches required by Westridge's legacy systems. That afternoon, I registered a company, Northpoint Analytics LLC, boring name, forgettable even, the kind of name that could sit in state records unnoticed while I built my weapon. I made 2 phone calls, the first to Sarah Kim, a brilliant developer who'd left Westridge 6 months earlier after Mark had promoted his nephew over her, the second to James Wright, a quantitative analyst who'd been restructured out, despite his models outperforming Brennan advisories by 30%. We met at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from the financial district's prying eyes. "I'm building something," I told them. "Not competing with Westridge, the non-compete prevents that. Just creating tools for financial analysis. Open source, technically, very technical, very niche." Sarah laughed. "You're going to rebuild the entire system, aren't you?" "Better than rebuild, perfect it." James pulled out his laptop. "I still have my personal optimization algorithms. Never signed them over. I have the distributed processing architecture they said was too expensive to implement," Sarah added. "We worked from my apartment at first. 3 laptops on a dining table, fueled by coffee and quiet rage. We weren't copying Westridge's code that would be corporate theft. We were building what Westridge should have built if they'd listened to us instead of management consultants. Every function was cleaner, every process more efficient, every output more accurate. It was the system I dreamed of building, without Mark's interference, without budget constraints, without the politics that turned good ideas into compromised implementations. Make them owe, I wrote again in my journal that night, underlining it 3 times. They would, every penny they'd made on my work, every client they'd retained using my systems, every risk they'd avoided through my frameworks, they would owe for all of it. And the beautiful part. They wouldn't see it coming until the bill arrived. By month 4, Northpoint Analytics existed as more than just a Delaware LLC and 3 laptops. We'd moved into a small office in Queens, nothing fancy, just a converted loft with good internet and no view of Westridge's tower. Sarah had recruited 2 more developers, both refugees from corporate downsizing. James brought in a data scientist who'd been blackballed for refusing to manipulate numbers. Our team of outcasts was building something extraordinary. The platform we created wasn't just an improvement on Westridge's systems, it was a revelation of everything they'd done wrong. Where their risk assessment took minutes and required manual oversight, ours processed in seconds with built-in validation. Where their reconciliation system flagged false positives 40% of the time, ours achieved 98% accuracy on the first pass. "This is what you proposed 3 years ago," Sarah said one evening, looking at the architectural diagram on her screen. "The distributed ledger integration, the real-time risk scoring, the automated compliance checks, everything Mark called academic overthinking." "Not everything," I corrected. "This is better. This is what I would have built if I'd been listening to logic instead of politics." We kept our heads down, incorporated as a research firm, published white papers on financial technology innovations. To anyone watching, and I knew Mark had people watching, we were just another fintech startup in a city full of them. Harmless, theoretical, academic. Then the whispers started reaching us from our network still inside Westridge. They're hemorrhaging clients, David told me during one of our clandestine coffee meetings. He'd been careful, rotating cafes, using Signal for messages. Morrison Group pulled out last week, said the reporting discrepancies were unacceptable. What discrepancies? The kind you used to catch and fix before they became problems. Brennan Advisory doesn't understand the underlying architecture. They're putting band-aids on compound fractures. I stirred my coffee, keeping my expression neutral. That's unfortunate. Laura, their Q3 report was off by 12 million. The SEC is asking questions. The old me would have felt sympathy, maybe even guilt. The current me simply filed this information away. More intelligence trickled in through the invisible network of former employees. Westridge's new risk management system, the one Brennan had promised would revolutionize their operations, had crashed during a critical trading period, costing them 7 figures in missed opportunities. Their reconciliation process now took twice as long as before. Client complaints were mounting. But the real gift came from an unexpected source. Marcus Thompson, a senior analyst still at Westridge, reached out through LinkedIn with a fake profile. They're in panic mode, his message read. Mark is telling the board it's just transition turbulence, but everyone knows the systems are failing. Brennan's trying to rebuild your frameworks from scratch, but they can't figure out the core algorithms. They're offering contractors $50,000 just to explain how your old processes worked. I screenshot the message, added it to my evidence folder, and didn't respond. Meanwhile, I started publishing, not under my name, not yet, but through Northpoint Analytics, technical analyses of risk management failures in mid-market financial firms, case studies of how poor system architecture led to regulatory scrutiny, white papers on the importance of intellectual property documentation in financial services. Each publication was a breadcrumb, leading careful readers to one conclusion: Westridge Capital was built on stolen foundations. The financial press picked up our white papers. FinTech Weekly ran a feature on our innovative approaches to traditional problems. The Risk Management Association invited us to present at their annual conference. We were becoming visible, but in exactly the right way as thought leaders, not competitors. Then I played my next card. I had Sarah create a demonstration video of our platform, showing its capabilities without revealing the proprietary code. We posted it on our website with a simple message: the future of financial risk management, built on academically proven frameworks, first published in 2019. That date was critical, 2 years before I joined Westridge. The video went viral in fintech circles, not massive viral, but enough that people who mattered saw it, including Westridge's board members, including their investors, including the SEC investigators who were already sniffing around their discrepancies. Thomas called me at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. I just got an interesting call from Westridge's legal team. They wanted to know if you were behind Northpoint Analytics. What did you tell them? The truth? That Northpoint Analytics is a legitimate research and development firm focused on financial technology innovation. That any similarities to Westridge's systems are purely coincidental, as our frameworks predate your employment there. And they hung up. But Laura, they're scared. My contact at the SEC says Westridge is under preliminary investigation. Something about systematic reporting errors and risk assessment failures. I walked to my window, looking out at the Queen's skyline, deliberately chosen to avoid any view of Westridge's tower. Good. You know they'll come after you once the non-compete expires. Let them. By then, it won't matter. Because you'll have built something better. I smiled at my reflection in the dark window. Because by then, they'll realize they never owned what they thought they stole. Every algorithm, every framework, every innovation they claimed as theirs, it was always mine. And soon, they'll have to pay for the privilege of having used it. The journal on my desk was almost full now, documenting every step, every decision, every piece of evidence. The final pages remained blank, waiting for the climax I could see approaching like a storm on the horizon. Make them owe. The words had become my mantra, my prayer, my promise. In 2 months, the non-compete would expire, the new law would be in effect, and Laura Mitchell would officially return from the dead, not as a former employee seeking revenge, but as the rightful owner of the intellectual property that held up Westridge's entire house of cards. The foundation was set, the evidence was compiled, the alternative was built. Now all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to present them with the bill. The cracks in Westridge's foundation became public fractures in December. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece titled, "Mid-Market Firm Struggles with Risk Management Crisis," that didn't name Westridge directly but included enough details that everyone in the industry knew. Their third-quarter filing had been delayed twice. Morrison Group's departure had triggered an exodus, 4 more major clients gone in 2 weeks. I read the article at 6:30 a.m., coffee cooling in my hand, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. Then I started writing. Not as Laura Mitchell, not yet, but as anonymous industry observer on Quant Finance Forum, the premier discussion board for financial professionals. My post was surgical in its precision. Interesting case study in what happens when firms lose institutional knowledge. Consider a hypothetical mid-size capital firm that dismisses its chief architect of risk management systems. Assuming external consultants can maintain complex proprietary frameworks without understanding the underlying mathematical models, particularly the Brownian motion adaptations and modified Black-Scholes applications documented in Mitchell 2019. Journal of Financial Analytics, such systems inevitably degrade. The result? Systematic reporting errors that compound over time. The reference to my published work wasn't accidental. It was a flare shot into the night sky. The post garnered 300 responses in 4 hours. Senior analysts from major firms dissected the theoretical scenario, many adding their own observations about similar situations they'd witnessed. Someone leaked internal Westridge communications showing panic over their inability to reconcile positions. Another anonymous poster shared that Brennan Advisory had approached several former Westridge employees, offering consulting rates of $500 per hour just to explain how the old systems worked. Sarah found me in the office that afternoon, laptop open to a Reddit thread. "You're trending," she said. "Someone cross-posted your analysis to RR's financial careers. The comments are brutal." I scrolled through them. Westridge employees, hiding behind throwaway accounts, were confirming everything. The systems were failing. Brennan Advisory was out of their depth. Mark was promising the board a fix that everyone knew was impossible. "Phase 2, Sarah asked. I nodded. "Release the comparison study." We'd been preparing this for weeks, a technical analysis comparing traditional risk management approaches with next-generation frameworks, side-by-side screenshots showing processing times, accuracy rates, error handling. We never mentioned Westridge by name, but anyone who'd used their systems would recognize the interface elements, the report formats, the specific failures we highlighted. The study went live on our website at 4 p.m. on a Friday, timed for maximum impact. Financial Twitter exploded. LinkedIn was flooded with shares and commentary. The consensus was brutal. Whoever was running on those traditional systems was operating with dangerous inefficiencies. Mark must have seen it. I imagined him in his corner office, that pristine backdrop now feeling like a cage, realizing that someone was methodically documenting every flaw in the empire he'd claimed to build. The following Monday, a new post appeared on Quant Finance Forum, this time from a verified account belonging to a respected industry analyst. Has anyone else noticed that Northpoint Analytics framework bears striking resemblance to academic work published in 2019? Specifically, Mitchell's integrated risk management thesis. If these are indeed implementations of those frameworks, it raises interesting questions about IP ownership at firms using similar systems without proper attribution. I hadn't written that post. I didn't need to. The community was connecting the dots themselves. David called me that night, breaking 6 months of silence. "Laura, they know it's you." "Who knows what?" "Everyone, the whole building. Mark had a meltdown in the partner meeting. He accused you of corporate sabotage." I haven't mentioned Westridge once. Everything I've published is about theoretical systems and academic frameworks. He knows that. Legal told him he has no case. That's why he's losing it. "How bad is it?" David laughed, but it wasn't happy. "Remember that risk assessment module you built? The one that evaluated portfolio volatility? It crashed last week, completely corrupted. Brennan tried to rebuild it, but they don't understand your variance calculations. We had to halt trading for 6 hours. 6 hours of halted trading. In their world, that was a catastrophe that echoed in boardrooms and regulatory offices. The SEC sent another letter," David continued. They're asking about systematic failures in risk controls. Laura, there's talk of a formal investigation. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. You planned this, he said finally. From the moment they fired you, they planned it themselves when they built everything on frameworks they didn't own and couldn't understand. I just stopped preventing the inevitable collapse. The non-compete expires in 3 weeks. I'm aware. What happens then? I looked at the letter Thomas had drafted, sitting on my desk awaiting my signature. A formal notice of intellectual property infringement, a demand for retroactive licensing fees, an offer to negotiate rather than litigate. Then they get the bill, I said. After I hung up, I sat in my dark office, city lights glittering beyond the window. Somewhere across those lights, Westridge was burning through emergency meetings, consultant fees, and what remained of their reputation. They'd erased Laura Mitchell from their history, but they couldn't erase the mathematics she'd created, the frameworks she'd built, the systems they'd never bothered to understand. I opened my journal to one of the last empty pages and wrote, December 15th, the foundation has cracked. The structure is failing. When the non-compete expires on January 1st, I will present them with 2 choices. Pay for what they've stolen, or watch it all collapse. Either way, they will finally understand that some things can't be erased, some people can't be disappeared, and some debts must always be paid. The silence they'd tried to buy was about to become the most expensive mistake of Mark Reynolds' career. January 2nd, 9 a.m. sharp. The non-compete had expired 36 hours ago, and Thomas Hernandez hand-delivered our letter to Westridge Capital's headquarters himself. I watched from a coffee shop across the street as he entered the building, imagining the envelope making its way up to the executive floor, to Mark's pristine office with its unread books and practiced angles. The letter was a masterpiece of legal precision. Thomas had crafted it like a surgeon's blade. Unauthorized use of proprietary intellectual property. Our client, Laura Mitchell, hereby provides notice that Westridge Capital has been utilizing proprietary frameworks, algorithms, and systems that constitute her intellectual property, developed prior to her employment and documented in Mitchell 2019, Integrated Financial Risk Management in Mid-Market Firms, Journal of Financial Analytics. Evidence demonstrates systematic implementation of these frameworks without proper licensing agreement or attribution. This includes, but is not limited to, risk assessment algorithms documented in Appendix A, automated reconciliation protocols, Appendix B, and predictive cash flow models, Appendix C. We are prepared to offer a retroactive licensing agreement to avoid litigation. Please respond within 72 hours to arrange negotiations. Attached were 50 pages of evidence, screenshots, Git logs, email chains, academic publications with highlighted sections showing identical mathematical frameworks, the comparative analysis showing Westridge's systems using my exact variance calculations, my specific algorithmic approaches, my unique solutions to complex financial modeling problems. Thomas called me at 9:47 a.m. It's delivered. Reception confirmed Mark Reynolds personally signed for it. And we wait. We didn't wait long. At 2:15 p.m., Westridge's chief legal officer called Thomas directly. I sat in his office, listening on speaker. This is extortion, the lawyer said without preamble. This is intellectual property law, Thomas responded calmly. Your client has been profiting from my client's work without compensation. We're offering a peaceful resolution. She developed those systems as an employee. Work for hire doctrine clearly. She developed them 2 years before employment, as documented in peer-reviewed publications. Would you like me to send you the journal citations again? Silence. Then what does she want? Fair compensation. Retroactive licensing fees based on the revenue generated using her frameworks. Ongoing royalties for continued use. That would be millions. Yes, Thomas said simply. It would. The call ended with the lawyer promising to discuss with leadership. I knew what that meant. Mark scrambling to find a way out. Brennan Advisory running damage control. The board demanding explanations. That evening, the Quant Finance Forum exploded again. Someone had leaked that Westridge received a formal IP infringement notice. Speculation ran wild. The stock price of Westridge's parent company dipped 3% in after-hours trading. Sarah pulled me aside the next morning. They're trying to rebuild everything from scratch. My contact says Brennan has a team of 20 developers working around the clock to create new systems that don't use your frameworks. Let them try, I said. It took me 4 years to develop those models. They think they can replicate that in days. The 72-hour deadline approached. Thomas's phone rang at 4:58 p.m. on January 5th. We'd like to meet, Westridge's lawyer said. Tomorrow, our offices. Neutral ground, Thomas countered. The Meridian Club, 10 a.m. They agreed. That night, I stood in my Queen's office, looking at the wall where we'd mapped out Westridge's entire system architecture not from stolen documents, but from my own memory, my own designs, my own innovations that they'd claimed as theirs. Sarah and James stood with me. You could destroy them, James said quietly. Demand so much they'd have to declare bankruptcy. I could, I agreed, but that's not the point. Then what is? I thought about Mark's face on that Zoom call, the practiced cruelty of his announcement, the systematic erasure that followed. The point is to make them pay, continuously, perpetually, for what they tried to steal. Every quarter when they write that licensing check, they'll remember. Every time they run a risk assessment or generate a report using my frameworks, they'll know whose work it really is. And if they refuse, I smiled. Then we release our platform publicly, open source, free for anyone except companies currently under SEC investigation for systematic risk management failures. Sarah laughed. That's absolutely vicious. That's justice. The meeting was set. After months of silence, Laura Mitchell was about to walk back into their world not as a discarded employee begging for recognition, but as the architect demanding payment for the house they'd built on her foundations. I opened my journal to the last page and wrote, January 5th, tomorrow I face them not as their victim, but as their creditor. They thought they could erase me, but instead they've proven that everything they built depends on what I created. The silence is over, the bill has come due, and Mark Reynolds is about to learn that some debts can never be discharged, some names can never be erased, and some women's work can never be stolen, only rented, at a price they'll be paying forever. The pen felt heavy as I set it down. Tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. The Meridian Club's conference room was deliberately neutral mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. I arrived at 9:45 a.m., wearing the same black blazer I'd worn to my first day at Westridge, now tailored to perfection. Thomas was already there, documents arranged with military precision. Mark entered at 10:03, deliberately late, flanked by 2 lawyers and Brennan Advisory's CEO. He'd aged years and months, his golf course tan replaced by exhaustion. His practiced confidence cracked around the edges. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. Laura, he said, like my name was bitter on his tongue. I didn't respond, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge him beyond a glance. I opened my portfolio and pulled out a single document, my published thesis from 2019, pristine in its university binding. Shall we begin? Thomas said. Westridge's lead counsel, a silver-haired man who probably billed more per hour than I'd made in a month, cleared his throat. This claim is preposterous. Ms. Mitchell was compensated for her work as an employee. Stop, I said, my first word in the room. Everyone turned to me. Page 47 of the thesis, the risk assessment algorithm using modified Brownian motion. Would you like me to write it on the whiteboard? I stood, picked up a marker, and began writing the mathematical formula from memory, each symbol precise, each variable exactly as I'd published it years before anyone at Westridge knew my name. Now, I continued, still writing, would someone from Brennan Advisory please come up and explain how this formula, my formula, ended up as the core of Westridge's risk management system? Brennan's CEO shifted uncomfortably. Similar mathematical approaches can be developed independently. I turned, marker still in hand. Similar. It's identical, down to the variable naming conventions. I used Greek letters in a specific pattern: alpha for primary risk, beta prime for market variance, gamma subscript m for temporal adjustment. Not standard notation, my invention, yet somehow, mysteriously, Westridge's system uses the exact same conventions. Silence. Thomas pulled out a laptop, connected it to the room's display. Let me show you something interesting. Code filled the screen Westridge's code, obtained legally through the discovery process. These comments in the code, they say Mitchell Framework Implementation, 67 instances throughout the system. Mark's lawyer leaned forward. Comments can be added by anyone. Time-stamped, Thomas interrupted. Added during Ms. Mitchell's employment by users with admin access. Should we subpoena the access logs to see who approved these implementations? I returned to my seat, setting down the marker with deliberate calm. Here's what happened. I developed these frameworks in graduate school. I brought them to Westridge because I believed in building something great. I looked directly at Mark, took them, claimed them, then discarded me like I was nothing more than the messenger. You were well compensated, Mark said, his first real words. For my time, not for my intellectual property. There's a difference, though I wouldn't expect you to understand it. Thomas slid a document across the table. Our terms: retroactive licensing fee of $4.7 million, based on revenue generated using Ms. Mitchell's frameworks over the past 10 years. Ongoing royalties of 12% on any revenue generated using these systems going forward. Full attribution in all documentation. Mark's lawyer laughed. That's absurd. We'll see you in court. Will you? I asked. Because court means discovery, full discovery, every email, every document, every communication about how these systems were built, including the ones where Mark explicitly stated that the frameworks were what was the phrase, Laura's baby that we're adopting. Mark went pale. He'd written that email to the board 2 years ago, thinking it was clever. There's also the matter of the SEC investigation, Thomas added casually. They're very interested in systematic failures in risk management. Imagine their reaction when they learn the systems failed, because the company never properly understood intellectual property it was using without authorization. That's blackmail, Mark's lawyer snapped. That's consequence, I replied. Brennan's CEO spoke for the first time. What if we stop using the frameworks entirely? Build new systems. I smiled then, the first time since entering the room. Please do. In fact, I encourage it, because Northpoint Analytics will be releasing our platform publicly next quarter, free for most firms. We'll even provide migration assistance for companies looking to move away from, let's call them, legacy systems of questionable origin. You can't, Mark started. They're my frameworks. I can do whatever I want with them. I leaned forward. Every one of your competitors will be using better, faster, more accurate systems, for free, while you scramble to build replacements for something you never understood in the first place. The room fell silent. Through the windows, Manhattan sprawled below us, indifferent to the small war being fought in this conference room. Mark's lead lawyer requested a recess. They filed out, leaving Thomas and me alone. They'll cave, Thomas said quietly. I know. The number's fair, more than fair, considering what they've done. It's not about the money. No, he agreed. It's about the check they'll have to sign. Your name on their ledger. Forever. 20 minutes later, they returned. Mark wouldn't look at me, staring instead at a point just over my shoulder. 2.5 million retroactive, 8% ongoing, attribution in internal documentation only, his lawyer said. 4 million, 10%, full public attribution, Thomas countered. They went back and forth, numbers flying like bullets. I sat silent, watching Mark shrink with each exchange. Finally, they reached terms 3.2 million retroactive, 10% ongoing royalties, attribution in all technical documentation. There's one more thing, I said as they prepared the settlement documents. I want it paid quarterly, not annually, quarterly. Why, Mark's lawyer asked. I looked directly at Mark. So 4 times a year, you'll have to sign a check to the woman you tried to erase. 4 times a year, you'll be reminded that everything you claim to have built stands on my foundation. Mark's hand shook as he signed the settlement. As we left, Thomas carrying the executed documents, Mark called out, Was it worth it, all this for revenge? I turned at the door. Revenge would have been destroying you. This is just collecting what I'm owed, every quarter, forever. The elevator doors closed on his stricken face, and I smiled all the way down to the lobby. The first quarterly payment arrived on April 1st, 3 months after the settlement via electronic transfer at 9 a.m. sharp, $320,000, accompanied by a formal letter on Westridge letterhead acknowledging the licensing of Mitchell Framework Technologies. I had it framed and hung in my office at North Point Analytics, right where visiting clients could see it. By then, our company had grown from a revenge project to a legitimate force. We'd secured 3 major clients who'd fled Westridge during their meltdown, drawn by systems that actually worked as promised. Sarah had built a team of 12 developers. James ran a quantitative analysis division that was getting attention from Fortune 500 companies. The office in Queens had become too small. We were moving to a full floor in a Manhattan building, ironically, with a perfect view of Westridge's tower. The day we moved in, Rachel called me. My former protege had finally left Westridge and wanted to meet. We sat in my new corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city, and she told me everything that had happened after the settlement. Mark was removed as COO last month, she said. The board couldn't ignore the losses anymore. The SEC investigation, the client exodus, and then having to pay you millions for systems they'd claimed were proprietary, it was too much. What's he doing now? Consulting, or trying to. Nobody will hire him after word got out about what really happened. The whole industry knows he built his reputation on your work. I felt no satisfaction in his fall, no joy in his humiliation. That wasn't the point. The point was the check that would arrive every quarter, regular as clockwork, each one signed by whoever replaced him, each one an admission that Westridge Capital existed on foundations I had built. Do you hate him? Rachel asked. I considered the question, looking out at the city where I'd been erased and then resurrected myself. No. Hate would mean he still has power over me. He's just a reminder that silence doesn't mean surrender, that being erased doesn't mean disappearing. 6 months later, I stood before the Financial Technology Innovation Conference, presenting to an audience of 500. My name badge read, Laura Mitchell, CEO, North Point Analytics. No one introduced me as a former Westridge employee. I was introduced as the developer of the Mitchell Framework, the author of groundbreaking research, the woman who'd revolutionized risk management in mid-market firms. During the Q&A, someone asked about intellectual property protection in financial services. Document everything, I said. Every innovation, every idea, every framework you develop, timestamp it, publish it if you can, because someday, someone might try to claim your work as theirs. And when that day comes, you want to be able to prove, beyond any doubt, that you are the architect of your own accomplishments. The audience applauded. In the third row, I spotted a familiar face, David, my former deputy, now working for a competitor. He smiled and nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. The second quarterly payment had arrived that morning. Another $320,000, another formal acknowledgement, another reminder that some debts never expire. That evening, I returned to my apartment, a penthouse now, with a view of the entire financial district. I pulled out the leather journal I'd kept through everything, now full except for one page. On it, I wrote, They tried to erase me with silence. They tried to bury my work under their names. They tried to reduce 10 years of innovation to a footnote in their corporate history, but numbers don't lie. Mathematics doesn't forget. And every 90 days, when they write that check, they remember I was never just a silent accountant. I was the architect. And architects always get paid for their blueprints, even if the payment comes late, even if it comes through force, even if it comes 1 quarter at a time for the rest of their corporate existence. I closed the journal and placed it on my bookshelf between my published thesis and the framed settlement agreement. Outside, the city lights twinkled like a constellation of possibilities. Somewhere in those lights, Westridge Capital was preparing their next quarterly payment, their permanent reminder that Laura Mitchell could not be erased. The silence I'd chosen after being fired hadn't been surrender, it had been preparation. The numbers they'd called dry and boring had become weapons. The balance sheet they'd thought was just paper had become the proof of their debt. And me, I'd become something more than they'd ever imagined, not just a survivor, but a creditor. Not just an architect, but a landlord collecting rent on the house they'd built with my blueprints. Every quarter, forever. The revenge wasn't in destroying them, it was in making them pay. literally and perpetually, for trying to destroy me. And in the end, that was a balance sheet that would never stop favoring Laura Mitchell. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice served cold. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story of turning silence into strength resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed workplace injustice that deserved this kind of payback? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, remember, document everything, know your worth, and never let them erase your contributions.